Albom program on this Thursday, your ride home. The law passed in 2008 allowing medical marijuana use here in the state has been either hailed in certain circles as a great step forward to helping people who are in extreme pain or dealing with some terminal illnesses and giving them some of the benefits of medicinal marijuana, or has been criticized as a boondoggle for people who want to get their hands on dope and have found a nice, convenient way to do so. A set of reforms proposed by Republicans claims, if you listen to them, 8 bills, to clarify confusion around the issue. These 8 bills, according to them, would outlaw patient-to-patient exchanges of the drug, would open the state's medical marijuana registry to law enforcement, and would establish zoning guidelines for the dispensaries where they could give it out. Doctors would also be required to prescribe pot only to patients with whom they've had a long doctor-patient relationship. In other words, you couldn't just walk in and be diagnosed 5 minutes later and, okay, now we're prescribing medical marijuana. Those in favor of these changes say that it will end confusion. Those who are critical of them, like our next guest, Michael Komorn, who's a Southfield attorney and president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, say these seem more like laws for law enforcement than for the patients who were supposed to be the original beneficiaries of this. Michael's on the line with us right now. Huh, Michael?
Hey, Mitch. How you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. So what's your objection to these?
Well, I have a problem anytime you start creating laws that are targeted at specific people. You know, the complaint about the issues with the doctor, I don't have a problem with them trying to make some adjustments so long as it's across the board for all physicians who are dealing with patients. I don't like the idea that specific laws are being designed to deal with specifically the patients here.
Well, okay, but this is about a specific law and about medical marijuana. It isn't about, whether you're giving out Oxycontin or other things. I mean, this is specifically about medical marijuana, right? So what's the problem with them trying to address the specific issues that are going on with that?
Well, it's not any different than going to a doctor for anything else. That's my point. The focus here and the exaggerated issues and the fear that's being generated by, the Attorney General and the other legislatures doesn't really address what needs to be addressed, which is that sick people are not getting their medicine, and law enforcement is interfering with that.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the perception by the people who are critics of this program is that as soon as it went in, people started trying to figure out shortcuts. And, if I can just get somebody I know who's a doctor, or if I can get a guy who is, it does have a legitimate card, but then can pass it on to me as kind of a patient-to-patient thing. This is just a faster and legal way of me getting my hands on pot. Now, I'm not saying that's happening or isn't, Michael. I don't move in those circles. But, I hear enough to know that there are people out there trying to abuse the system, and people who feel that the system is being abused. Now, isn't that where this is coming from?
Of course that's where it's coming from, but there's always going to be, situations like that in any place in our society. There's always going to be bad apples in every bunch. The legislation misses the point of the Medical Marijuana Act, which was to provide safety to patients, sick people who are trying to use cannabis to treat their serious debilitating conditions, as well as the people that are cultivating it for them. And these bills don't even contemplate that. These are law enforcement generated bills that are providing more ways for law enforcement to arrest caregivers and patients. It doesn't contemplate the challenges that patients have in acquiring their medicine and the challenges of caregivers trying to cultivate it for them.
Give me an example of, if these reforms went through and became law, of how this could hurt an innocent party in this deal.
Okay. Let's say you become a caregiver for a loved one that's sick. You've taken, their physician has certified them to become a medical marijuana patient, and you fill out the application to become a caregiver and you send it to the state. First of all, you're not going to get your card for 6 months, and even though the law says that after 20 days the application that you send to the state is deemed a valid registry card, law enforcement doesn't understand that. What's more is that where are you as a caregiver, Mitch, going to get your plant or your clone or your seeds? According to Bill Schuette, according to this legislation, you would never be able to get that, and your sick person that you're trying to care for would go without their medicine. So the patient-to-patient transfer is mandatory for the program to work. What's more is, let's say you're the caregiver and you've never before cultivated marijuana in your life. You have a sick person that's relying on you. You're doing it in your basement. You're going to want to have somebody looking over your shoulder that knows what they're doing. And the law that Schuette has implemented, or his opinion, would not allow that. Think about after 4 months or 3 months of cultivating plants, you're going to feel comfortable with turning over medicine to a sick person. There needs to be some reasonableness here. There needs to be a concept of assisting the patients and what really needs to be done. None of this legislation is contemplating things through the patient's eyes.
So your take is that it's basically how can we crack down on anybody who might even be thinking of taking advantage of this thing, but in doing so, they might be stepping on the very people for whom this law was designed.
Yeah, and it's I can understand where law enforcement's coming from, but most of the complaints should really be focused on how they're looking at this law. I mean, the reality is that it's been 2.5, 3 years since the law passed. There was 70 years of prohibition where law enforcement, was always investigating and arresting for marijuana, and the state has taken in $8 million just on application fees. Not one penny of that has been spent to try to train or adjust the mindset of law enforcement. I mean, all of these announcements, all these bills are still in that way of thinking. This law was intended to be prophylactic. It was intended to protect people and really give law enforcement an opportunity to not make patients, sick people, and the people that are helping them the major priority. You're seeing just the opposite. These bills, are a step at, inflating the budget for the new niche, which is, people that have violated the Medical Marijuana Act. That was not the intent of the voters here.
Michael Komorn is a Southfield attorney and president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. Been our guest on this. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Mitch. Thank you.
It'll be interesting to see where this goes. Well, I do think there are people who ruin it for other people by taking advantage of it, but I do think that there's like this knee-jerk thing, like, how dare we legalize this? This is the very thing that we've been fighting against, and people aren't taking into account that, like, in places like Ann Arbor and other places, this isn't even viewed. It's not equal, is what I'm saying, depending on where you happen to be standing or parked in the state. The attitude towards whether you own or have smoked or know somebody who has marijuana is so different that it really is going to be hard to codify it in law, because there are people who just feel that this is the devil's seed, and there are other people who go, come on, are you kidding me? This
it's not as bad as
marijuana. And by the way, if they're using it for medicinal purposes, and I happen to know because I have people in my family who need this, who have terminal illnesses, it's an act of kindness. I mean, it enables them not only to deal with pain, it provides an appetite, all the rest of it. If you're one of those people who goes, oh, come on, man, then you just don't know what you're talking about. You just don't. You've never dealt with somebody who's in terminal stages of cancer or other kinds of diseases for whom this is the only thing that works without leaving them throwing up over a toilet. And if you're so cold-hearted that you think, oh, well, too bad, it's illegal and it's a drug, well, then, I really don't have anything to say to you, except that I hope that it never happens to a loved one in your family, because when it does, you're not worried about whether or not this particular substance in the wrong hands of the wrong person can get you arrested. You're just interested in your loved one getting some kind of relief.
Right.
And that's who this should be used for. But there are people out there who go, oh, I got a friend who's got one of those medical marijuana cards, and he can get us this stuff. And those people do ruin it for other people.
But then there's people, Oxycontin has been, you saw this thing the other day, down 75, there's this big Oxycontin thing going on, which is a prescription drug, but, you don't see the big upcry about it, because like you said, it's a theoretical thing about reefer madness in the 50s, and everybody sees that. And, you know, if you're politically on this side of the issue of all marijuana is bad, and if you're on the other side, it doesn't matter. Those two will never come together.
Look, parents keep alcohol in the house. It's against the law for minors to drink alcohol, yet it's okay for adults to drink alcohol, and it's in the same house. And they manage to find ways for people to exist, and they don't arrest you for having bottles of vodka in your house when you have children. It seems like there's got to be some way for those people who need marijuana for medical purposes to coexist with people who don't and shouldn't be using. Okay? That's just a simplistic way of looking at it. 760 WJR.